Danganronpa. It's a series about high school students who are put into killing games by a psychopathic bear named Monokuma. And for as absurd a concept that might seem, I do think these games manage to be equal parts thought-provoking and humorous. If you don't know, I've been on a journey of reviewing every notable game in the Danganronpa series because these games have really stuck with me ever since I first played through them, and I wanted to figure out why. There's only been 4 major games released in the series to date, which means we're actually halfway through this saga now. And the one I'm going to talk about today is one I was really looking forward to because it's definitely the black sheep of the franchise. It's a spin-off. I like the idea of spin-offs. They're perfect for allowing developers to explore established elements of their game in a completely different concept. And they can be great opportunities to give lesser characters some time to shine in the spotlight. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what Spike Chunsoft did with Danganronpa Another Episode, Ultra Despair Girls. That is a mouthful. So, coming off the heels of Danganronpa 2, Spike wanted a spin-off of the series that was more action-heavy, and series creator Kazutaka Kodaka, who was equally as eager to write a game in the Danganronpa universe that wasn't primarily a visual novel, started work on Ultra Despair Girls. The final product ended up being a third-person buddy shooter with visual novel elements. It's also a midquel taking place sometime between Trigger Happy Havoc and Goodbye Despair. If you're unfamiliar with those, I recommend watching my previous videos on both that'll catch you up to speed with where we are now. Also, I'm gonna warn you in advance, this game deals with some taboo topics, even for a Danganronpa game, including all kinds of abuse against children. If that type of stuff disturbs you, then you may not want to watch this video. Seriously. The story starts with an animation of a girl named Komaru Naegi who happens to be the little sister of Makoto Naegi. She's both frustrated and miserable over the fact that she's being kept hostage in a tiny apartment. She also has no contact with anyone besides the person who delivers her food each day. She's grown accustomed to her situation though, as she's been stuck for over a year now, but that all changes one day when someone tries to break into her apartment. But it's not a someone, it's a something. It's Monokuma, and he wants to kill you. But before Monokuma can gut Komaru, she's rescued by future Foundation member Byakuya Togami, who gives Komaru a megaphone hacking gun that can disable the Monokumas. Now, fast forwarding a little bit because there's a lot of prologue until the game actually starts. Komaru escapes from the apartments into Towa City. She gets captured by a bunch of these Monokumas when she tries to escape. She wakes up in a room with someone called the Servant, and she meets these little turds called the Warriors of Hope who consider her a demon. Then the Servant straps a wristband on her arm that'll explode if she tries to leave Towa City again, and they throw her out of an aircraft into the city, starting their demon hunting game. There's no battle royale this time, just a manhunt by these children you have to try and survive. From the roof Komaru lands on, she meets Toko Fukawa from Trigger Happy Havoc. Then they team up with the agreement that Komaru will help Toko find Byakuya, and Toko will help Komaru find a way out of the city. And now we're free to play. Something you're gonna notice right off the bat about this game is that it really takes a second to get going. It was seriously about an hour of cutscenes and tutorials before I was able to play the game without being stopped for some more exposition every 2 seconds. I am willing to cut the game some slack here because Danganronpa has always been story heavy, and just because the game's a third-person shooter doesn't make it any less important. But going from a tutorial into 5 seconds of gameplay, into an info dump, into 5 more seconds of gameplay, into another info dump, into a cutscene, in the first 60 minutes is not the best first impression. It doesn't stop there either. Once you get into the actual game, you fall into another rhythm of slowly running to a destination, clearing out some enemies, being bogged down by some more dialogue, and repeating this for over 5 chapters. The game is constantly taking control away from you to let characters have a conversation or show you something unimportant. I mean, the story was interesting, and it did keep my attention, but I still think they could have been more concise in their writing. Some of these conversations do require stopping the player and having cutscenes to explain what's going on, but a lot of them don't. It just ruins the pacing of the game for me. A great solution would have been doing that thing where characters talk to each other while you're actually playing the game, and you see their little speech bubbles at the bottom of the screen more often. That right there could have fixed the flow of this game by a lot. Another thing you're gonna notice right off the bat is the game is in 3D. This isn't actually the first time we're seeing these characters in 3 dimensions, as there were cutscenes in games prior that utilized 3D models, but this is the first game in the series that strays from being almost entirely 2D. Granted, there still are some 2D elements like the character sprites and a few of the cutscenes, but unfortunately this game didn't really stick the landing in its transition to 3D. The models aren't poorly made, but they do all look lifeless in comparison to their bold, expressive sprites, and it doesn't help that they're both on screen together, showing just how bland these 3D models really are. Like, look at these gross canned animations everyone does with their constantly open eyes, it's so off-putting. These 3D cutscenes aren't pretty either. Characters move awkwardly, and it just looks very amateur overall. I imagine the game doesn't have a lot of 2D cutscenes because they cost more or they're more time consuming to make or something, but they look so much prettier than whatever the hell this is. I found a lot of these environments to be lackluster as well. It has some cool levels and things that are worth stopping to look at, like the graveyard, but a good chunk of this game is spent in boring sewers and subway stations and towers, and I just couldn't care about those at all. I had a more fun time exploring the environments in the first couple games, you know, in the first person segments where you could walk around. I mean, you can't tell me you didn't think something was waiting to jump out and scare you around each corner of Hope's Peak. This game does have a couple of cool ideas when it comes to how they build out their environment though. Like, I like how most of the adult NPCs have their skin obscured so they can reuse the same models. And I'm not being a smartass, I think that's a really clever idea. And I like how the fire is just one wobbling PNG they just duplicated and changed the color of a couple of times. It's a really cool and simple effect. Another thing I want to compliment about this game's presentation are the different menus in the game's pause screen. These things are so full of character and pretty to look at. Like, look at these cute little chibis. I feel like whoever did the art for these screens had a lot of fun making them, and it shows. My favorite thing about Ultra Despair Girls has to be the soundtrack though. The soundtracks in these games are great, but I think it's especially fantastic here. It's a jazzier soundtrack, remixing a few of the series' older songs to be more mellow. It kind of reminds me of how some musicians will release live versions of their songs and have an unmixed band playing in the background. I might be biased though, because really, just add more drums to anything and you've won me over. Enough about the music though. How does the game actually play? Well, the gameplay itself is just okay. The most fun you're gonna have is in the combat. Komaru's basic attack is a little blue orb that deals moderate damage, but if you hit a Monokuma in their glowing red eye, you'll one-shot crit them and your next attack will be stronger. Throughout the game, you'll unlock new types of ammo too that gives you different attacks like Paralyze, which can shock enemies, and Burn, which is just a faster and weaker version of your basic attack that can't crit at all, so it's pretty useless. The hacking gun is also capable of doing more than attacking. You'll get this special ammo that lets you do things like make the Monokumas dance or even control them. They seem like gag effects at first, but they actually do open the game up to a bit of strategy. For example, if you fire the dance bullet at this Siren Monokuma that's standing in water, it'll attract all the nearby Monokumas to it, and then you can fire a Paralyze at one of them and watch as it electrocutes all the other Monokumas who are standing in water. Or maybe you want to sneak behind one of the big fat ball Monokumas to use a knockback bullet on it that'll send it rolling into other Monokumas. And if at any point you think the game is too hard, or you just want to go all out on these Monokumas, you can switch from playing as Komaru to Toko's second personality, Genocide Jill. She's invincible and has OP special attacks, but works on a timer, so you can't just plow through the entire game with her. I tried to stick with Komaru as much as possible anyways though, because using the hacking gun was way more fun. As a matter of fact, a lot of the puzzles in this game are centered around the hacking gun. Yeah, there's puzzles in this game. They're mostly about you figuring out how to take out a lot of enemies in the most clever way. You'll often come across these puzzle rooms called game corners that you're not allowed to leave until you clear the room of all enemies, and this is where you get to mix and match all those ammo types and be most creative with how you take out all the Monokumas. I don't really like how 90% of all the puzzles in this game are centered around defeating Monokumas though. This game has those more traditional puzzles and riddles where you have to figure out the right code or right symbols or something. They're just not as common, and that's a shame. Also, as much as I enjoy the puzzles, I think this game has way too many of them. I mean, anytime you start making decent progress through a level, you come across one of these things, and you have to stop and figure out how to solve it before you're allowed to move on further, just ruining the flow of this game. I mean, you could just brute force your way through all the enemies if you don't feel like solving them the intended way, but you still have to stop and enter this room if you want to go beyond it. Also, I enjoyed the challenge way too much to just kill all the Monokumas the normal way. But if you want even more challenge, this game also has a few boss fights. These suck too. The main ones are all against these mechs, which I really like, but their fights are really boring. It's the standard wait for the enemy to attack and don't get hit, then attack their weak spot when it's exposed. Sometimes they require a little more involvement by you having to stun them first, but for more than half the bosses in the game, this is how you do it. Your attacks against them feel really weak and ineffective too. They just stand there and take it with tiny flinches as your gun makes this light pew sound. And when you finally beat them, it's like, that's it? There's no pomp and circumstance at all. Like seriously, look at this. A little more spectacle than these tiny explosions would go a long way. Besides the combat, this game is filled with hidden collectibles too. If you're like me, you're one of those people who like searching every little corner for every hidden node and document. My favorites were the bounty posters that showed other characters who were also participants of the demon hunting game. These guys were references to other characters in the series, and some of them you can actually meet in game. Of course, the biggest callback to previous Danganronpas is the one Komaru spends all game with though. I'm talking about Toko, of course. I really like the way her character has evolved here. She's still crazy and obsessed with Byakuya, but you see the effect Makoto's had on her as the ultimate hope. Her guidance helps Komaru go from someone who's cowardly and timid to someone who overcomes all obstacles and inspires hope in others just like her brother. And that's really the core message of the game they hammer in. Even if you're boring and generic and plain and dull and normal, you can do remarkable things no matter what adversity stands in your way. You can even argue that's the point of previous Danganronpa games as well, but I think that message is weakened when you realize the previous protagonists weren't normal people, but in fact ultimate hopes. That's totally not the case here too, right guys? But for as much as there is to like about Toko, there's as much to dislike about her as well. You come across this resistance to the Monokumas at one point, and Toko gets mad at their leader Haiji because he won't fight back against them. And it's hard to be on her side when this guy's arm was literally crumpled like paper by one of the Monokumas. Komaru has a special gun, and Toko has superhuman feats as Genocide Jill, but what can she expect a small group of injured survivors to do against a swarm of robot death bears? I mean, it's really hard to be on her side here. Now, light spoilers, ultimately Toko is proven right, and the humans can fight back, but it's through something everyone didn't know they were capable of, so that big moment of Haiji telling Toko she was right the entire time feels totally unearned. With all that said, I do like the relationship between Komaru and Toko. It takes a while for them to really bond, but you can believe the chemistry between these two. They get along, they fight, they laugh, they cry, there's a betrayal, there's a reconciliation, and none of it really feels forced. I think they're the highlight of the game for a lot of people, and I get it. Another highlight of the game would be the Warriors of Hope. Personally, I found the Warriors of Hope to be the most interesting part of the game by far. Not the best part, but the most interesting. There's Masaru, Jotaro, Kotoko, Nagisa, and Monica, who all happen to be little ultimates who went to Hope's Peak Elementary. For a little more backstory, they also all happen to come from different but severe types of abuse by their parents, and almost committed mass suicide as a result. But a certain Junko Minashima stopped them at the last second, and molded their hatred of their parents into a disgusted loathing for all adults, or demons. And thanks to the guidance of Junko Minashima and the army of Monokumas they now had in their possession, the Warriors of Hope would enact their plan to hunt down all demons and turn Towa City into a paradise for children. And that's where we are now. So even in death, Junko continues to be a problem for everyone. You also learn these children aren't entirely resolute in their actions. They have guilt, they doubt themselves, and they try to find ways to enact their plan that doesn't involve killing everyone. The Warriors of Hope are evil little shits, that's undeniable, but it's hard not to feel a little sorry for them. Their innocence has been corrupted by everyone, from their parents to other adults to Junko Minashima. They never had a chance to live normal lives, and you see how their abuse shapes their personalities as well. Masaru's reaction to fear is to literally beat it out of himself, a lingering effect of his father abusing him. Nagisa's super smart, but at the cost of his parents cruelly forcing him to study every day without rest. Jotaro's mom hated him so much that he started to find his happy place was in being abused. For the most part, I think the game is pretty mature and depressingly realistic in how it handles the trauma of each of these children, but I will criticize this game for how it treats Kotoko. Kotoko's abuse was being molested and filmed by strangers with her parents' permission from a young age, and you see how that shapes her personality into someone whose talent is the ultimate drama, which I don't mind that much because it's another example of the game showing how the abuses these children have been through has had an effect on their personalities. But the game turns around and pointlessly sexualizes Kotoko itself. She's constantly being upskirted. Her boss fight has you tearing off her clothes. One of the tools Kotoko uses is a groping machine that you have to play a mini-game of. I mean, it's used on Komaru instead of Kotoko, thankfully, but they still would have gotten their point across about how twisted and depraved Kotoko has become without this stuff, in my opinion. It's unnecessary, and worst of all, it appeals to the very same pedophiles that this game villainizes. I think they dropped the ball big time with Kotoko. The Warriors of Hope also have a special Monokuma of their own called Kurokuma. He works as the advisor in their plan to kill off all the adults, and he also talks way too freaking much. I guess I can talk more about the game's story now too. There's no mystery here like there is in the other Danganronpa games. Everything's played fairly straight. The story here isn't as important in the grand scheme of things either, but for those of you who care and have never played the games before, there will be spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you know what to do. So, after fighting a bunch of Monokumas, Komaru and Toko eventually come across this non-hostile Monokuma who's painted himself white and goes by the name Shirokuma. And Shirokuma leads the both of them to a secret base where some of the Killing Game survivors hide out at. Haiji, being the leader of this group, claims there were resistance against the Monokumas, but doesn't do much to fight back against them besides rallying more survivors. Toko sees this as cowardice and gets into an argument with him, which concludes in both Komaru and Toko being kicked out of the base. And while Komaru and Toko are still trying to find a way out of Towa City, you see how one of the Warriors of Hope, Monika, is a little darker than the others. It's slowly revealed over the course of the game just how manipulative and devious she can be to achieve her plans, which is continuing Junko Uenoshima's legacy. Some more time passes, and Komaru and Toko gets in Haiji's good graces again by protecting their base from an invasion, which results in Shirokuma's almost death. Then Komaru rallies everyone together to fight back against the Warriors of Hope. You guys gain control of this giant Monokuma called Big Bang Monokuma, and then go to war against the normal Monokumas, and it all ends with Komaru gaining possession of the controller Monika used to control the Monokumas. And to beat the game, all you have to do is break it, which kills everyone.
The savior of Towa City. It's all thanks to me.
Nah, I'm just kidding. To actually beat the game, you have to hold back from breaking the controller as both Haiji and Monika goad you on, but for their own reasons. Haiji wants you to break the controller because it would finally put an end to this war, but the reason why Monika wants you to break it is because Komaru would then be the one responsible for killing a bunch of children, which would then lead to an even more devastating war, making Komaru worthy of someone being called the successor to Junko Uenoshima. Yeah, Monika didn't want to become the second Junko herself, but have the Ultimate Hope's little sister become the second Ultimate Despair. I like that twist a lot. It would have been a cool parallel. This just makes Komaru even more steadfast in her refusal to break the controller, but Monika says she knew this would happen and reveals she killed Komaru's parents to make her give in to despair, which actually almost works as Komaru begins to wonder if she should break the controller or not. But Toko saves her from making a big mistake at the last second. Soon after that, the gigantic Monokuma starts attacking everyone, and the final boss fight concludes with Komaru and Toko using the power of hope to put down the big Monokuma. Komaru is another Ultimate Hope. I bet you didn't see that one coming. And then it's GG as you watch the ending of the game where everyone abandons Monika to die. She doesn't actually die though. Nagito saves her last second, and you also see someone pushing a wheelbarrow carrying both Shirokuma and Kurokuma heads away from the wreckage. It turns out the only reason why these guys were the only Monokumas with some sentience is because they were both being controlled by the Junko AI that's later used in the Neo World program in Danganronpa 2. Man, that is a lot of Danganronpa to keep up with. I don't have a lot to say. It's another decent story in my opinion. I like the ending. It feels conclusive to the characters from Danganronpa 1, resolving several character arcs, and this plot gives a nice look into the wider world of Danganronpa 2. Also, seeing this city in ruin, and meeting all these characters who've been pushed to their wits' end, wishing they were dead rather than alive, really brings back that hopeless feeling that I didn't really feel in Danganronpa 2. And if there's one thing we like here, it's misery. I also think Kaiji as a character is a good example of not all hope being a good thing. Toko and Komaru finally convinced him to fight back against the Warriors of Hope, but you see how he completely loses his sanity and is willing to kill children to end the war. I think this is what Komaru could have become if she didn't have a Toko around to support her. But that's Ultra Despair Girls. This is, without a doubt, the weakest game of the entire bunch. As far as the gameplay goes, well, it's a competently made game. I mean, it's not like it's filled with bugs or anything. What's here works as it should, but Ultra Despair Girls doesn't really offer anything unique or innovative like the other Danganronpa games do. And besides the art and music, I don't think it's polished enough in any one area to feel like there's something special here to appreciate either. The hacking gun is fun to use, but it's not nearly enough to save the game. And while I'm at it, what's with this completely throwaway line by Haiji where he admits to being a lolicon, and Komaru finding him more attractive because of that? This didn't need to be in the game. I would not recommend this game at the asking price of $30, even if you're a fan of the series. I'm not even gonna say wait for it to go on sale or something, just don't buy this game. This game is mediocre, and in some ways I think that's even worse than being offensively bad, because at least with a bad product, you can analyze what went wrong with something and suggest ways to make it more enjoyable. But this is just whatever. If the Danganronpa name wasn't attached, I'd consider Ultra Despair Girls a gross and mostly forgettable Japanese game that I played through one time. If you really want to know the story, go watch one of those movie videos with all the cutscenes and fights. If you want to play a game that I was reminded of constantly while playing this one, go pick up Resident Evil, any one of them. There's even a lab section towards the end of this game. The good news is, we're 3 Danganronpa games down now with only 1 left to go. The next one is probably the most polarizing one in the entire series, but it's more of a traditional Danganronpa game, and really there's nowhere to go but up from here, so stay tuned. One more game! One more game! The next Danganronpa video will be the last one in our little saga here. I love these games, man, but I think we've just about had our fill of the series by now. Does it go out with a bang though? You'll have to find out next time. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.